Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Aaron Meta Show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Casual Chats. I'm Patricia, and I am here once again with Paul Thomas, aka Gunterfan1992. So, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, so the last time that we were together, we talked about Adventure Time Distant Lands, and now we're talking about another Adventure Time spin-off series slash continuation series, whichever that you prefer to call it, and it's called Adventure Time Fionna and Cake. It premiered on August 31st of 2023, and it just ended less than a month ago. So yeah, I'm actually really excited to be talking about this.
Me too. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. I think there's a lot to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, shortly after Distant Lands was over, I remember us talking about it was really great that we were able to get a focus on BMO, Marceline and Bubblegum, Finn and Jake, and Peppermint Butler. But I would have loved to have seen more or less other focus on the other characters. Like I would have loved to have seen Flame Princess. I would have loved to have seen maybe an entire story about Simon slash Ice King. Well, I guess they kind of listened to us in a way when they decided to announce roughly around, I think it was about last year, or maybe it was actually around the same time that Distant Lands was just ending, because that's when we first heard about Fionna and Cake. But the only thing we had at the time was just this promotional art piece. Then as more interviews started coming along, we started learning about the direction that they were going into, because I think I remember a long time ago that Susanna Makos was interviewed on CBR, where she was talking about that they were hoping that this series was going to lean towards the people who grew up with Adventure Time, because I mean, it's kind of hard to believe, Paul, but Adventure Time is almost 15 years old.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Yeah, and I'm currently my current job at the moment is actually working at a university, and I am surrounded by 18 to 22-year-olds. And then I remember to myself, wow, I'm surrounded by people who more or less grew up with Adventure Time when they were kids. So I guess at this point in time that it's still pretty relevant, and a lot of people are still praising the series even to this very day. And I guess with the idea of Fionna and Cake, they were thinking along the lines of, yeah, Adventure Time has been around for so long. Let's see if we can have a sequel series slash spin-off series that can lean towards the people who grew up with the series. So we're going to make it a little bit more darker. We're going to make it a little bit more violent. We'll put a few maybe bits of swear words here and there. We'll just push a little bit more of the further limits that we've ever did with Distant Lands. Because I remember our discussion. We thought that Distant Lands was the furthest that we've ever seen in Adventure Time, but no, we were proven wrong. Fionna and Cake pushes it even further than Distant Lands.
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. I was a little apprehensive at first when I heard about that, but overall, I think the growth, or if you want to call it that, or the pushing of boundaries was done in a very reasonable way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Adam Muto came up with the idea of focusing on Fionna and Cake as the main protagonist based off of the massive popularity that the character had. So we briefly covered Fionna and Cake in the original Adventure Time podcast, so I think that we can give more in depth with it now. So for those who don't know, Fionna and Cake was based off of the idea of one of the writers and storyboard artists on Adventure Time named Natasha Allegri. And she decided to have some fun posting these drawings of a gender swapped Finn and Jake on her Tumblr. And then all of a sudden it just blew up and it exploded. Now, for those who are wondering, why does that name sound familiar? Well, Natasha Allegri is the creator of Bee and Puppy Cat, which is a major popular animated series that was featured on the Channel Frederator YouTube channel, and that eventually had another series on Netflix. So that's probably where some of the ideologies of Fionna Cake may seem a little bit familiar for those who have tuned into watching Bee and Puppy Cat.
Yeah, it's always funny when I meet someone and they're like, "Oh, I know you like Adventure Time. Have you seen this other show, Bee and Puppy Cat?" And I'm like, "Well, interestingly enough, there is a connection."
Yeah, why don't you go more into it? Because I'm sure that you have a lot more stuff that you want to go over now that Fionna and Cake is a little bit more relevant to our discussion.
Yeah, sure. So first thing to note is that Natasha was originally hired on as a character designer for Adventure Time during its first season with Tom Herpick, and she was eventually promoted or switched to storyboard revisionist, where she stayed in that position for quite some time. But it was during the earlier parts of the show, I want to say when she was a board revisionist, but it might have still been when she was a character designer, that she posted those character drawings, posted them online. People loved them, and Penn Ward and the producers were like, "Hey, maybe we can do something with this." And so Adam Muto and Rebecca Sugar were tasked with coming up with the Fionna and Cake episode, which they storyboarded, and the fandom really dug it. I got into the show just a little bit after that episode would have aired. Actually, no, I guess it was quite a while, several months after the episode aired. But I remember that was one of the things that I remember seeing about people talk about, and so I was kind of surprised when there was just basically one episode at the time for this gender swapped duo, considering how much the fandom had kind of like talked about it. But yeah, it just sort of took off, and people really enjoyed it, and so they kept making more, and they started to explore the gender swapped versions of other characters. They had, gender swapped Marceline, who was Marshall Lee, voiced by Donald Glover, aka Childish Gambino, in an inspired casting choice, if I do say so. But yeah, and then they just kind of kept going. And the original series, the last Fionna and Cake episode, at the time was, in my opinion, a little disappointing because it ended on this weird cliffhanger where we learned that the Fionna and Cake stories were being beamed into the Ice King's brain, and then the series ended, and we never got an answer to that. And I remember being very frustrated that was sort of a major plot point that they just never explained. And now that we have the Fionna and Cake miniseries spinoff, like as you said, whatever you want to call it, I think that issue has been taken care of, and I actually quite like how they wrapped the existence of Fionna and Cake into the universe that we know and love, the main Adventure Time universe that we know and love. And they didn't just do it in a way that was like, here's these, oh, it's just a random universe, or oh, here it's just fan fiction. They actually kind of gave a mythological explanation for it, and it was a funny explanation too.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas in the original series, they made it look like it was based off of Ice King's fanfics. But no, it actually turned out to be in the original series where a mysterious beam just shot into Ice King's head. So it made it look like that the ideas of Fionna and Cake were being triggered into his mind, and Ice King thinking that he came up with it. But in reality, no, it was actually just brought there by some unknown source. But now that we have Fionna and Cake, all of that stuff has been answered. And just like what we discussed about in Distant Lands, in which it was a continuation of Adventure Time, it took place long after the events of the Gum War. So we were able to find out what the characters were up to. And this time around with Fionna and Cake, the reason why we say it's a sequel series is because it takes place I don't know how many years after Distant Lands, because
Yeah.
if you remember from Obsidian, we did see an adult Finn. And when we see in Fionna and Cake, he's much older than what we saw before, but not as old as we say with Together Again, in which, he's an old man and, spoiler alert, he's dead. So, yeah, it's definitely in between those two particular storylines.
Yeah, I feel like Finn has to have been like maybe in his 30s or something. I don't know. Maybe that's a little too old for him, but yeah, he was definitely an adult, an adult human man,
Mm-hmm.
which was
Yeah, for
pretty
sure.
not necessarily jarring to see, but very. I'm not used to that. I'm used to Finn, the little noodle-armed kid, not this like super buff
Yeah, super
adventure.
buff beefcake
Yeah,
Finn.
which was pretty funny. But I
It,
liked that his personality. They really kept his personality consistent, which I appreciated.
I do
That's
agree, yeah.
I seemed that seemed like an important thing. And I was worried, an adult Finn would maybe be a little too serious or something, but no, he's still the Finn we know and love, just mature and wiser.
Yeah, and very interesting how they decided to swap his partner in this incarnation because if you remember in Obsidian, he was teaming up with Bronwyn, who's Jake's granddaughter, but this time around we have TV, who's one of Jake's sons, and we saw him becoming a detective in the last episode of Adventure Time. So, kind of interesting about how the awkward one is actually going to be Finn's partner of all people.
I like the idea that Finn is, after Jake died, Finn went around to his family and was like, I should probably make connections with these people. And then he learned that he actually had more in common with them than he thought, and maybe that led to these partnerships.
Yeah, I can understand where you're saying because it's really nice to see that even long after Jake died, that Finn decided that he was going to continue teaming up with Jake's family members and go on crazy adventures together. So that is actually really nice to see. And I'm glad that we were able to kind of like get that middle point after the events of Jake dying. So that is really nice to see again. But no, the focus this time is more on Simon. So we now get to see what happened at the end of Adventure Time and, of course, with Obsidian. But he wasn't really much of a focus on Obsidian. So let's just say that for the sake of ease for our listeners, it takes place, right after the Gum War. And we do get to see, Simon's life after Betty was absorbed by Golb, where essentially he is running this museum slash attraction where what was it like living in human society in the 90s, and he's just this old relic and he is miserable. He wants nothing more than to bring Betty back out of Golb so that he can be able to have a happier life because he just feels so out of place. Him and Marceline aren't as together as much anymore because obviously Marceline is with Bubblegum, as we saw with Obsidian. And he tried to connect with with Finn again, but Finn's adventures are just way too dangerous and way too much for Simon to handle. And so he just feels like he needs to do something. And so he brings Choose Goose because sure, I guess Choose Goose from what we saw in the last special involving with Peppermint Butler. Yeah, let's see if we can bring him into it. Why
Yep.
not?
Yeah, absolutely. Get some evil magic juice flowing
Yeah,
through
exactly.
everything.
Get the evil magic juice that he was able to gain through in that last special in Distant Lands to try to revive Gold, but instead it actually activates in his mind the world of where Fionna and Cake reside in. And we do get to see Fionna and Cake in what is essentially their world, which is really boring and mundane. And we have essentially Fionna and Cake playing off the lines of what Bee and Puppy Cat are. For those who have seen Bee and Puppy Cat, is about a 20-something-year-old young adult who is unemployed and is just struggling to become an adult. And we have Puppy Cat, who is essentially like really magical, and they're going around into different dimensions and exploring things together. And it's almost essentially that, even though the Natasha Allegri was not involved with Fionna and Cake, it almost feels like she is because Fionna and Cake are essentially Bee and Puppy Cat.
Yeah, you can definitely tell the DNA that she infused into it is alive and well.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that obviously there's a lot of people that are to credit for that, but I feel like Adam Muto, if there's one thing that he has been good at, it's taking a vision that someone has and then sort of refining it and then keeping that spirit alive. Like I think he's done a great job keeping Pinward's spirit alive, and in this case, I think he did a good job sort of
Yeah, I do
accumulating.
agree. I agree 100%. And I just really love this introduction where we get to see the life that Fiona is living through, where she's just absolutely miserable. And it's very realistic for,
Hmm.
people who are in maybe like their mid to late 20s or early 30s, where they're just struggling with the mundane. They hate the jobs that they're at. They're struggling to, make ends meet. They're struggling to pay the rent, and they are just wanting to have more than what they have and what is offering to them. So yeah, I think that it's a great segue into the craziness that we would get to see throughout the course of the miniseries, in which, we have Fiona who just wants so much more than just this provincial life. I'm going to quote Beauty and the Beast here. So, yeah, basically, she's just trying to go through the job of, being a tour guide, and she absolutely hates it. But then she gets fired, and even though she needs the job, and then we get to see the gender swap characters of the series from the Fionna and Cake specials that we got to see throughout the course of Adventure Time. We got to see Marshall Lee. We get to see well, not necessarily the bubblegum prince, but we get to see something like that in the form of Gary Prince, who works at a bakery. And instead of and instead of a Lumpy Space Prince, we have essentially a character named LSP, as in like ELLISP, and he is basically like some sort of like carer of animals who just talks and thinks that it's very all mystical and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you essentially have like all these little homages and touches of like the original series and implemented into like this normal town. And then finally you get to see where when Simon was doing the spell on Choose Goose and trying to bring Betty out of Golb, and then finally we get to see Cake coming out of Simon's head first, and then later on Fiona, and then we do get to have the beginnings of a massive adventure. And yeah, I guess we can talk about any particular moments that we found really great or not so great throughout this discussion. So why don't we get started?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that
Oh,
this is
by the
a
way, one more thing before we go any further. Spoilers, major
yeah.
spoilers. I know that I'm sure that some people have already seen it at this point, but I actually know somebody who's literally getting into Adventure Time for the very first time, and he told me to please give a spoiler warning. So at this point in time, spoiler warning. If you have not seen it, go watch it on Max, or wait until it comes out on Cartoon Network. Okay, now let's begin.
All right. Well, I do think that first off, this was a roller coaster, and some of the episodes are among the best the series has produced, I would say.
I agree.
While I do have some issues with how it ended, there were a lot of just set pieces and individual moments that were really, really solid and really, really funny. And I'm trying to think of a good place to start. Do you have any things that pop into your head?
Well, I'm trying to think because one of the first things that I recalled was when we got to see Simon's life after the events of Adventure Time. That was the one that really stuck out to me. Even though that I did enjoy Fiona and Cake's introduction in the first episode, that second episode just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like,
Yeah.
Simon Petrikov, who was dedicating his entire life into trying to do all of his research, and then eventually like losing his mind for over 1,000 years as the Ice King, and now he's back to normal and he's completely lost. Simon went through so much in Adventure Time. Sure, in the first couple of seasons, we just saw him as the Ice King, and he was just this wacky guy who just wants nothing more than to marry princesses. And then when we find out about his backstory, he's like, oh, wow. Okay. So it's about this scientist who wore the crown, and then he just ended up going crazy for 1,000 years. And then finally, when he's able to become free of that, he has nothing left. The only love of his life is pretty much gone, eaten by this space abomination. And the closest thing to a daughter has already like long grown up, and now she has a significant other that she's mostly with. And the little boy that used to be thwarting him all the time, he's already grown up, and he's still just the same adventurer he's always been. But now Simon has already reached the point of age in which he can't handle that kind of stuff anymore. He can't fly anymore. He doesn't have ice powers. He's not a wizard. He's just a regular guy. But yeah, I think that just seeing that for the first time, catching up with the characters long after Adventure Time has ended, you get to see about like, wow, they're really taking this into a further level than we've ever seen it in.
Absolutely. And I think with that second episode, it really resonated with me as well. And part of that was because this last December I earned my PhD. And so I'm done with that. And then when I was done with that, I was like, what is next? I was at the top of the mountain, so to speak, and I was like, okay, this is the top of the mountain. Dot dot dot.
Yeah.
And seeing
Yeah.
Simon, obviously I didn't lose the love of my life. She wasn't eaten by a space abomination or anything like that, but it still was a weird situation where like something I had worked for so many years and wanted, I had, and then I'm like, okay, well, what comes next?
Right.
And that can open up just a horrible can of depression, surprisingly enough. Just I don't want to say the meaninglessness of having what you've always wanted, but like you now are faced with that big question of, well, what do you do? What is the
Yeah.
next step? And I think that with Simon, it was obviously he tried to live a normal life, and then he resorted to using choose goose magic, which I'm assuming is probably some sort of stand-in for like drugs or some sort of substance abuse, something that's damaging to the psyche, that he probably shouldn't have been partaking in, but he did it because he just needed to feel something. But of course, that had in the darkness, there always is the light. There always is the potential for something good. And Fiona and Cake were buried in his head subconsciously, and for whatever reason, they were brought into Oo, and then everything proceeded into it. Like you said, it just wrapped up into a grand adventure. And it was nice to finally see Simon obviously finally get a W. He's taken L after L, and he's a very nice man. He's an extremely nice and likable character, and you just want to see him happy. And by the end of this miniseries, for better and for worse, no pun intended, I feel like is in a better place than he ever has been. And that was nice to see. And that was very, very satisfying. As someone who has enjoyed the Ice King, his development, how he's grown up, his relationship with Betty, it was nice to see him finally be in a place where he's kind of free from all of that sadness and that angst. And now he can just live his life according to the principles that he himself has, live his life the way he wants to.
Right. I do agree. And yeah, I would say throughout the course of the series, it's essentially a focus on Fiona and Cake and Simon trying to get away from our new villain, who's known as the Scarab. The Scarab essentially works around in the same dimensional department as Prismo, where Prismo is able to look at every single dimension and every single alternative world and find out, if it's going according to plan, if it's not going according to plan. This guy takes his job super seriously. And we see throughout the course of Fiona and Cake that Prismo is just going through the doldrums. Like everything has not really changed too much. So he's just basically like going on autopilot. And then, things start shaking up once the world of Fiona and Cake, which by the way, now we finally find out how this all came to be. So Prismo was going through this whole thing of he was feeling bored, and so he decided to create like this alternative gender swap thing, a Finn and Jake story on into a fan fiction kind of thing, and then decided to insert it into Ice King's head because reasons. And so that's where the whole laser thing happened. So yeah, Prismo's the one who's responsible for Fiona and Cake. At this point in time, I'm not too surprised.
Yeah, I was when they did that reveal, I laughed because I was not expecting that. And it was a very funny way, I thought, for them to actually make the existence of Fiona and Cake make sense. Like, why would they exist? Well, it was Prismo. Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Especially like taking it like super far away from all of the other dimensions because technically they're not supposed to exist. So it kind of reminds me of when the Almighty Tallest told Zim to conquer some part of the world when they just wanted him to go away. And they just pointed him to like some sort of unknown planet that doesn't really exist. And then Zim decides to, go so far into the galaxy where he eventually quote unquote finds the unknown planet and it turns out to be Earth. So yeah, so think of it like that mixed with the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, in which like, oh, we have this unknown world that just so happens to exist, and if we cause something catastrophic to happen, they'll all go away and disappear like if they never existed. So yeah, let's just mix a little bit of that in there. So yeah, and the Scarab is, I would say, a pretty interesting villain. I mean, he's very threatening because he wants to be able to have the same position Prismo has. And so he locks him up in the cube and he chases Fionna, Cake, and Simon all throughout the different dimensions where it's essentially like more or less what we see in Ooh, but all in different facets, where we get to see a post-apocalyptic one, we get to see one where it's just fully ice world theme, we get to see one that is just like more really friendly. So yeah, it's essentially like dimension hopping throughout most of the series, where the main goal is, Simon trying to bring Fionna and Cake back into his mind so that they can be able to be safe from the Scarab. So they're trying to find a crown very similar to what the Ice King used to have. So they're going dimension hopping so they can find the equivalent of that. And you have Scarab who's trying to chase Fionna and Cake and destroy their dimension because it shouldn't even exist in the first place. And then you have Simon who's trying to find a way to not only bring Fionna Cake back into his mind, but to get Betty out of Golb. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, they really did pack a lot into this miniseries, and to touch on the point about Scarab, I like the fact that Adventure Time villains are always either mundane to a point of comedy or very scary, like the Lich. And I feel like the Scarab is kind of more towards that mundane side of things, where he feels very much like an HR executive or someone who just takes their job way too seriously, and like
Yeah.
he's very dangerous because he can wipe you out of existence or whatnot, but it still had this bureaucratic feel that made it very funny. Like he was doing all of this not because he was evil or because he had some, I mean, I guess he had ulterior motives, but it was largely because them's the rules and he's trying to enforce them to the best of his ability. He's like a hall monitor, an intergalactic hall monitor. And so he was a fascinating villain to work into the series. I was curious how they were gonna top the Lich or Golb for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, the worlds that they went to, as you mentioned, I think were probably some of my favorite parts of this miniseries.
Yeah.
We went to Farm World, which was the alternate universe that was introduced in the season 5 premiere. We also went to a ice world, where there was like a magic ice, quote unquote, friendly Ice King, voiced
Yeah. Who
by
kind of almost reminded me of the Snow Miser from There's No
oh
the
yeah.
Year Without a Santa Claus.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, because he's like, it's surrounded by ice and snow. He has all of his little minions and he's happy, he's singing, he's jolly. So it kind of gave me those kind of vibes for some reason.
I could see that very much so. I felt like as soon as we met him, I was like, there's something ominous here.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that Brian David Gilbert was his voice actor. I didn't realize that until after the episode was over, but I was like, that voice is very familiar.
Hmm.
And so that was just really, really funny. Also, pretty horrific when we got like the Candy Queen stuff, which
Oh
I think
gosh, yes.
is perhaps one of the greatest like one-off characters in the show.
Yes,
Like the vocal performance there was just fantastic.
I agree.
Um, and then of course having Fionna and Cake just like slaughter all those zombie candy monsters because they thought they were evil was a bit bleak, but still, I mean, it fit in with the sort of theme of making mistakes when you think
Yeah,
you're doing the
and we
right
get to
thing.
see the progression that Fionna goes through to trying to be a superhero where, she's trying to be one after living through this mundane life, but she's constantly making mistakes and she's learning from them. I mean, yeah, especially with the next world that we go into after the Winter King, where it's basically like, if Simon never raised Marceline, she would actually team up with the Vampire King, and pretty much all of existence was gone with the exception of vampires. And so we essentially have a Mad Max situation where there's like this rebellious group of soldiers who are trying to take them down.
Yeah, and I loved that. Yeah, Princess Bubblegum was like the Mad Max leader in a Peppermint Butler tank, and that
Yeah. Yeah,
Finn's
she
dad was
did
there
look a
too.
lot like Furiosa, yeah.
Yeah, and Finn's dad was there, alternate universe version of Finn's dad, but in this world, he apparently wasn't a bad guy, which
No, it,
was
it was very off-putting to see Martin as just like the nice guy. And then when
yeah,
baby Finn from the previous alternative world comes into the picture, he actually is caring for it, which is like, oh wow, this is a surprise.
yeah, absolutely. And then yeah, poor spoiler alert, poor alternate universe dad bites the dust.
Yes, he does.
And I was bummed out about that because I was kind of hoping that maybe he could redeem himself by raising baby Finn in the vampire apocalyptic world, but whatever. I
Yeah.
loved that Marceline we got to see Marceline or the star, I should say, in like evil form again.
Yeah.
It reminded me of Evicted. Granted, she wasn't really evil in Evicted. She just lost track of her moral code, as the song says. But it was still, this one gave the character a chance to really kind of go towards that darker end. And we can see her in this sort of depraved, like what Marceline could have become if Simon wasn't there to guide her. And
Yeah, exactly.
I really liked with all these little worlds, there was kind of this idea that without Simon, as we know him, the everything kind of goes to hell in a handbasket. With Farm World, he stopped the bomb, but he died doing it. With the Vampire World, he just died. And then with the Ice World, it was like if he had rejected his morals and basically used nefarious magic to save himself. And in all of these worlds, the outcome is always really, really bad. And it goes to emphasize this idea that Simon might feel like he has no purpose, has no meaning, that he's just kind of bumbling through life. But at the end of the day, he's kind of a major reason why the universe hasn't been destroyed. Because without him, none of this would happen. Without him, the world as we know it would be vastly, vastly different. And I
Yeah.
thought that was sweet because that's something I've often thought about with way back when in like season 5 when they talked about Simon raising Marceline. I was like, that's a really important moment for her because she could have very easily become some sort of evil demon,
Yeah, I mean
vampire
I mean
monster.
that's what Hudson wanted.
And so she didn't because of Simon. And now we get to see the sort of ramifications of, oh yeah, Simon's, again, he's taken so many losses that it's nice to see him, even if it's implicitly, shown to be kind of this hero that the worlds need. Even if he is a middle-aged antiquarian, he's still one of the most important entities that has ever existed.
Yeah.
And he's just a normal guy.
Yeah, he's just a normal guy, but he did so much depending on which dimension that you saw him in, whether it be with, sacrificing his life so that the bomb didn't explode during the Mushroom War, or, the fact that he was able to raise Marceline in a very homely environment in a time in which when everything was pretty much destroyed and her, Marceline's mother died. And we saw that with Distant Lands about how she was practically alone. And so it just makes you wonder about like, if Simon wasn't around and if Hudson was able to raise her until Marceline was ready to go into the world and then finally she confronted the Vampire King, what would have happened afterwards? So yeah, I think that all of these different dimension hoppings really shows us about like, yes, I mean, I know that the main objective is to get Fionna and Cake back into Simon's mind and into their world so that things will be back to normal and so the scarab doesn't destroy it. But at the same time, we wanted to know that final piece into Simon's story that we never got in either the original Adventure Time or with Distant Lands.
Yeah. And then that kind of ties into the whole tail end of the miniseries, which is his relationship with Betty, which I will say I loved the first 2/3 of this miniseries. It was like some of the best the show's ever done. And I feel like with the ending, it wasn't bad, but I feel like they fumbled it a little bit.
Okay.
I wasn't super happy with how they handled the Betty Simon stuff, but I think it all worked out in the end. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess we can start going into that. So, yeah, Casper and Nova and Cheers are the last episodes of this mini series, and it goes into a surprise that I never would have expected. Where the next dimension that they hop into is the one that is featured in the last episode of Adventure Time, which is 1,000 years later, because it's Shermie and Beth again. I never would have thought that I was
Yeah,
saw Shermie and Beth again.
I didn't either, and I was shocked at how much I was excited to see them
Yeah, me
when they were
too.
on screen. I was like, "Oh, yay! It's familiar faces," even though we'd only seen them in one previous episode.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I think that's when Shermie and Beth get introduced, though. That is where I started to feel like some of the storytelling faltered a little bit, because Simon swaps minds with Shermie, and then has like this vision with Golb, and then there's a really good flashback episode with that's sort of just like the story of Simon and Betty getting to know each other, falling in love, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But the thing that really rubbed me the wrong way was this whole sort of idea that one of the issues with their relationship was that basically Simon always just assumed that Betty was going to do what he wanted and that she was happy to do that, which I don't think is necessarily a bad message to send. Like, you shouldn't, relationship should be um, reciprocal and people should give and take. But I feel like what this all of this miniseries really showed was that both Simon and Betty had kind of a unhealthy obsession with the other one, to do like go above and beyond, to sacrifice themselves for the other one's life, which is romantic but also a little a little over the top at times. And I just wish that they had tightened the screws with that message a little bit, because I think they landed on their feet and they had the idea that, like, oh, Simon needs to live his own life because Betty sacrificed hers for him, and if he just wastes it, like, he wasted her sacrifice. That's great. But yeah, they use the Casper and Nova stuff to kind of imply that whole, like, always choosing Simon sort of thing, and that element of the finale, or the last few episodes, is kind of what I thought was a little off. Again, it didn't destroy anything. I just thought it wasn't as strong as it could have been, but it still was an emotionally satisfying ending that hit a lot of the story beats that it needed to.
Mm. So, what would you think that the lessons that both Simon and Betty would have gotten into on their sacrifices, as opposed to the whole Casper and Nova thing?
I love the idea that if you are in a relationship, you need to be willing to give, but also you have to get. It's not something where one person can always be the victor, do everything they want to do, achieve all their dreams and all that stuff, and the other one can't. At the same time, it's important to still be caring and care about that other person, and put them, I'm speaking my opinion here, put
Yeah, go
them
for it.
in front of you at certain times. And so, again, I don't think it was a bad message to say, like, Ice King needs to respect that what Betty did and what Betty chose. That's great. I just wish that they had also looked at the fact that, like, both of them kind of went ham in trying to save
Yeah.
one another. Betty, like, turned
Absolutely. I
into
mean,
an
we saw from season 6 onward that Betty did absolutely everything that she could so that she can get Simon away from being controlled by the crown. I mean, like, she went above and beyond of trying to do that. And then we saw with Simon about everything that he tried to do so that he can be able to get Betty back. And yeah, I mean, all of those things follow consistently throughout the series.
Yeah. And so uh, the story kind of ended with that message more so than they always chose Simon's story kind of message that the Casper and Nova episode sort of implied. But
Right.
I think just a little stronger emphasis on the fact that both of them, I don't want to, both of them made mistakes, and I think even Betty mentions that, and when she's in the bus,
Yeah,
and
she did. Like, what would
and
have happened if I would have just left and I would have just left Simon behind, as opposed to like going with Simon everywhere? I mean, Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a difficult, complex thing when it comes to relationships because, of course, when you're in a relationship with someone, all you want to be able, I mean, one of the major things you want to do is to make your significant other happy.
Yeah.
And some of the things that may want that you want to do that may make them happy is a lot of sacrifices. Like, okay, well, I want to be able to take this job offer in this business, and it's going to pay a lot more money and it's going to get a lot more benefits. But the problem is, it's in another country. Would your significant other be able to sacrifice leaving the place that they know of so that they can be able to go with their significant other into this location so that they can possibly make a better life? Or maybe it doesn't work altogether, and even though that the job that they're that this significant other is at is paying a lot more and has a lot more benefits, you yourself are miserable and you gave up everything so that your significant other will be happy. I'm sure that that's what the message that they were trying to go for, about like all the sacrifices that one significant other was able to do for another significant other.
Yeah.
And it showed off that Betty was the one who sacrificed so much for Simon, and Simon, all he cared about was just what he wanted for himself, not realizing that the whole point of Simon wanting to be able to bring Betty back is so that he can be able to continue off his life as normally. And we see that both Simon and Betty did some drastic things so that they can be able to make one another happy. I mean, Betty was able to control a whole bunch of magic, even like stealing magic from wizards, and doing so that she can be able to break away from Simon's control of the crown and the Ice King. And we have Simon, who was able to sacrifice so much so that he can be able to get Betty back from Golb, even though in reality, there's just absolutely no way that that could be possible. So, yeah, each of them did their own sacrifices in their own way, and each of them made a ton of mistakes along the way. For some reason, in this series, it made it look like Simon was the one who was making all of these selfish decisions, and then Betty was the one who got the comeuppance.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the bit that rubbed me the wrong way, because I never really got that impression. I'd always seen them sort of as equals. I mean, they co-wrote that book together, they were colleagues. I had just assumed that they obviously had sacrificed for one another, but that it was on a largely equal footing. And then this special kind of came in and sort of implied that no, they mostly just followed what Simon wanted to do, which again it's not a bad message to say, hey, don't do that. But I just thought it was a very late development, and I didn't particularly like it because it sort of painted Simon as a selfish person. And I mean, we're all selfish at times. I get that, and I think that's part of the lesson of the show too, is you can't change the past. But I don't know. I just thought it was unnecessarily harsh on Simon at points.
No, I'm
Especially,
sure if they would have introduced it like earlier on throughout the series, I can see that.
yeah. I think that's my issue. It sort of came out of nowhere, but they didn't really like super linger on it. It was sort of an element along the path to the greater message, which was this idea about, if someone gave their life for you to live, you should live, that kind of stuff. And that's great. And I think that's fine. And I liked how it ended. I thought it was a solid ending. And I'm happy that the miniseries existed. Because like when it first was announced, I was worried it was gonna, like, Adventure Time had been producing a lot of really quality stuff. And I was worried that Fiona and Cake was going to be the hiccup there, because I was like, how are they going to make 8 of these that are each 30 minutes long? Like, I don't understand. These are fan fiction characters. But instead, what they did is they not only expanded the universe and the mythology, but they took these characters that were previously kind of just like inverse caricatures, and they breathed some personality and life into them and made them their own people. And in
Yes.
fact, I know this is changing the subject just a little bit, but I was really impressed with what they did with Cake. I thought that they gave Cake some characterization and some screen time, some time to shine that she really hasn't had in the last Fiona and Cake episodes. I
Right.
remember there was one where she was doing something, and this wasn't the miniseries; it was in the original series. She's doing something, and she just goes, "Cake's helping," and it was almost like a lampshade of like how Cake doesn't really do anything; she's just kind of there to say things and then
Hmm.
change into something funny. But in
Right.
this miniseries, she was there. She played a part in everything, and she had like her full personality came out. And they were able to use is it Roz Ryan? Is that her voice
Yeah,
actress?
Roz Ryan,
Yeah,
yes.
they used her to, I thought, to like the best of her ability. She had some funny lines that she was able to deliver. And yeah, I was just really, really impressed with how they handled bringing Fiona and Cake to life.
Yeah. Absolutely. And another thing that I really have to give commending compliments to Fiona and Cake is the music that was featured in Fiona and Cake.
Yes,
I think that the
absolutely.
music that was featured by Rebecca Sugar, Half Shy, and with Zuzu are some of the best that I've ever heard in Adventure Time.
I always feel like whenever a new song comes out from Adventure Time, I feel like it's the best in Adventure Time, and then another one comes out and it's the best. So I would agree with you in the sense that I think that they are the that crew knows how to write a song and they know who to talk to when they're writing or when they need a song.
Yeah,
Half Shy hit it out of the park again. Zuzu hit it out of the park again. I'm a big fan of both of those artists, so I was delighted that they came back, and of course Rebecca Sugar. You know, can never get enough of Rebecca Sugar's tunes.
yeah. Part of the Madness is such an amazing song. Just talking about the life of Simon after the events of the Gum War. Just the fact that he's just lost and confused, and the fact that he's no longer being controlled as the Ice King, and all the feelings he's going through of trying to catch up with everything, but he just feels out of place in a world where, everything that he knew of is like over 1,000 years behind. And the things that was really close to him are pretty much gone. Like, obviously Betty is gone and Marceline is with Bubblegum, so he pretty much has nothing left. Not Myself is a really great song. It's basically like the main theme of Fiona, where it's basically just her being absolutely miserable of her mundane life. I remember seeing on Instagram the other day that Zuzu based off that song from something that she went through about, I think, a year or two prior to when Fiona and Cake was picked up, where at a brief time she had to move back with her parents, and she was just wondering about like what's going to be next for me. I don't know, I'm confused, I feel like I've taken a step backward towards my life. And so that's what got her the inspiration for the song. And then finally Everything in You, which is essentially the love song for Simon and Betty by Half Shy, is just again encompassing on what we were saying before about the relationship with Simon and Betty, in which, even though that they love each other, each of them are doing their own sacrifices so that one or another can be able to become really, really happy. And yeah, I think that each and every single one of them clearly know the characters that they're writing for, and the way that they're able to exuberate the feelings and emotions on each and every single one of them by song form. It is brilliant.
Absolutely, and I think that Adam Muto gets deserves some credit for reaching out and talking to those people, like getting Half Shine Zuzu to come on, because he he I think he could tell. Like I think he could tell that they were the ones that could do this. They cared so much, and they did, and they brought that energy, and it was awesome, and it was wonderful. And I'm glad that both, like I said, both of them came back, because I think both Half Shy and Zuzu are really wonderfully talented musicians, and it's always fun to hear more of their music.
Absolutely,
Um,
yeah. So for those who listened to our last podcast, if you guys remember, Half Shy and Zuzu were essentially fans of Adventure Time. Zuzu is from Liverpool and Half Shy is from Seattle, and Adam Muto loved their music so much that he called them in to write songs for Distant Lands, more specifically Obsidian. So Zuzu wrote Woke Up and Wanna Be With You, and Half Shy wrote Monster. So those songs became really, really big in Obsidian, and that's why it got the praise that it did. And so I take it that Adam Muto was wanting to work with them again of how great of a job they did, and they nailed it.
yeah,
They absolutely nailed it. They did a fantastic job writing those songs. And of course, Rebecca Sugar, I mean, no introductions on who Rebecca Sugar is. I mean,
yeah.
first of all, I mean, at this point in time, you probably already know who she is. But yeah, she did a great job as well. And yeah, the music featured is great too. Amanda Jones, who worked on Distant Lands, did the soundtrack for Fiona and Cake, and she did a really good job too. I really do enjoy the sporadicness of the opening theme song and the themes that were able to play every single dimension that they were able to go across. So yeah, I think that the music and Fiona and Cake is right up there with some of the best that Adventure Time has ever had. So yeah,
which
go
is
listen
saying
to it on
something.
Spotify if you haven't had a chance to listen to it.
Yeah, it's saying something too, because I feel like Adventure Time has a lot of bangers in its soundtrack, and the fact that they just keep churning out these songs that are so good is very impressive. In fact, the fact that the producers are able to churn out content that is this good consistently over and over and over again is sort of amazing, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess the thing that we didn't really cover too much on is, the world that Fiona and Cake is in. I mean, we there was this whole subplot regarding around Gary and Marshall Lee coming together. So I guess we didn't really delve too deep into that, which, by the way, it's really nice to get that bit of slice of life mixed in with the adventure from Fiona, Cake, and Simon. So I really do like the fact that, I guess, this alternative world's counterparts of Marceline and Bubblegum were able to become together. And it's actually really interesting of seeing essentially Marshall Lee's mom, who's this major CEO, and Gary, who's this baker who just loves sweets, coming together like this, very similar to Bubblegum and Marceline, who are opposites attract. So yeah, I really did like that part of the story mixed in with the adventurous side of Fiona and Cake.
I did as well. I was worried that I wasn't going to care as much, not because I don't care about the characters, but there's big stuff going on in this
Oh yeah, sure,
miniseries.
yes.
But they did a great job. It was very sweet. It was very in character. It felt natural, and I wasn't and it didn't hog too much time or anything. Like it would come in with the story, and we'd learn a little bit more about Marshall Lee and Gary, and then they'd leave us at a place where we're like, okay, well, I want to know what happens next. And it was just a very natural, wonderful buildup. And I was glad that we did get to see them. In fact, I kind of wish we had had more. I did like what we got though, so I guess no, I can't
Yeah,
complain.
so that Adam Muto recently said in an interview that maybe they're even considering doing a season 2 of Fiona and Cake.
Huh? I wonder how that would work. I mean, I'm sure it
Yeah, I
could.
was gonna say that.
I feel like if they do a special or do another spinoff or whatnot, the logical one for me would be a Shermie and Beth one, and
Yes, I
I
agree.
I know that on that topic, a friend of mine on Twitter was talking to Steve Wolfhard during a live stream. He live streamed his wife like pickling vegetables or something like that,
Oh,
and he
okay.
was he was answering questions. And my friend asked about the ooh 1,000 plus, the Shermie and Beth world, like who all is still there. And Steve said in his mind, in the intro to the finale, you see those little there's hands on the Ice King, the Ice Kingdom's like prison, and there's like a person in a parka with a telescope. Those were supposed to be Marceline and Princess Bubblegum. And I
Oh,
don't know if that's still canon or not, because it could change and whatnot. But
sure.
I think that if that is the case, there is a story that could be told about Shermie, Beth, and maybe Marceline and Bubblegum, uh, maybe fighting Gibbon or whatnot. So I think that there is a story, a really good story that could be told there, and so I'd love to see that. I wouldn't say no to more Fiona and Cake at all. I really enjoyed what they did with those characters. So, but that's just my kind of my wish for future content if it comes to that.
Yeah, I do agree. Yeah, so I don't really have much to say. So do you have any final words to say about Fiona and Cake right before we go?
Um, I am shocked that the program is still on, but also still producing good content. It's very common for franchises to just lurch on and kind of become zombies of themselves, and I
Hmm.
don't feel like Adventure Time has done that. Um, I feel like it's managed to stay relevant and fresh and doesn't feel tired. Still has a lot of good ideas. And I kind of think that maybe producing specials every couple years rather than cranking out episodes, you know 20 to 50 episodes a year, probably makes it easier to come up with ideas that feel a little more invigorating. But yeah, I'm just really really happy, and so I look forward to see what happens next with them. Can I also do a quick little promo plug?
Absolutely.
So I last time we talked on here, I had released a book for free called Exploring the Land of Ooh that was sort of a background of Adventure Time, a production history. And in the intervening years, I reached out to the University Press of Mississippi, and they were interested in reissuing it. And so I kind of rewrote it and added new stuff to it. In fact, I took some of the advice or suggestions you made. I can't remember if it was on the podcast or if it was just through Twitter about
No, I
talking
think
about
it was
like,
through Twitter. I do
okay.
remember this.
Yeah, you said you suggested looking at things like video games and comics and the movies, and so I did
Yes,
that, and so we now has a chapter on those things. So yeah, it's kind of a new and improved version. Unfortunately, it is not free this time since I'm going through a publisher,
of course.
but yeah, if you're interested, you can just exploring the land of Oo. It's the newest version. It's got a really awesome cover that I did not design, but it's really cool. It looks like kind of the Adventure Time esque style, and I was really psyched when I saw it. I also, if you're an academic, I edited a book called Analyzing Adventure Time that came out a couple months ago that has some scholarly essays in it, written by a variety of people, variety of researchers from around the world, all looking at Adventure Time from like a scholarly angle, analyzing it according to different theories. It's a little more technical, so if you're just kind of a casual fan or you're not a college professor, that might not be the one to start with, but just thought I'd mention both of those.
All right then. Well, yeah, I'm really excited to take a look at all of those things.
Yeah.
And
And
I'm
I'd
sure for
love
all
to
of our
hear what
listeners who love Adventure Time and love scholarly essays and discussions, I'm sure that we get a kick out of that.
yeah, definitely. At least I do, if I say so myself.
Of course. Yeah, and as for me, you can check out my stuff at oldschoollane.net. I have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/oldschoollane, youtube.com/oldschoollane. I'm still on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at Patty_B_Miranda. I'm also on Mastodon at Patricia Miranda. You can check me out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, all those places. New episodes of the podcast will go there first, and then they'll go up in a few days on YouTube. We're just wrapping up on Old Spooky Lane Creepy Chats. So we got some more episodes coming in, wrapping up Tim Burton month. And also we got a bonus episode for you guys that I'm really looking forward to. Working on some videos for hopefully coming out in November is a really cool themed month that I've been working on for quite a while. So hope you guys enjoyed that. And yeah, I've been enjoying what Adventure Time has to offer in terms of its specials with Distant Lands and Fionna and Cake. And I'm really curious as to see what's next for them, because I can clearly tell that they still have a lot more on their plate. I'm just waiting until to see what's going to be on the next chapter of their storytelling. So until then, Paul, thank you so much for coming on by. I really do
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone. Let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on Fionna and Cake. What were your favorite episodes? What were your least favorite episodes? Or what did you think of the transition between Adventure Time, Distant Lands, and then eventually towards Fionna and Cake? What other characters would you like to see focused in future installments of Adventure Time? That's it. Hope to see you around soon. Take care.